Have you ever had a deal just fall apart or a promise get broken? Of course, we all have. But when that promise is a formal contract, the law actually has something to say about it. So today, we're going to open up the legal toolkit and see exactly what happens when a contract is breached. What are the fixes? What are the remedies? Let's dive in. So, let's just get right to the heart of it. What actually happens from a legal point of view when one side doesn't hold up their end of the bargain? The other person is left in a tough spot, for sure, but what can they actually do about it? What are their options? Well, in the language of the law, that failure to perform is called a breach of contract. Simple enough, right? And when that breach happens, the law provides what's called a remedy for the innocent party. Now, think of a remedy as the legal system's way of fixing the problem. It's the tool used to enforce a right or to patch up an injury. So let's start digging into this toolkit. The very first, and by far the most common, tool we're going to pull out is money. Yep. In the huge majority of cases, the solution for a broken contract is for the party who broke it to pay the other party. We call this monetary damages. Now, the big idea here is really simple, but it's also incredibly powerful. The goal of these damages is not to punish the person who broke the promise. It's all about compensating the other person for the loss of the bargain. The law basically wants to hit a rewind button and then fast forward you to the exact financial position you would have been in if the deal had gone through perfectly. So, to make this happen, the law breaks down damages into four main categories. We've got compensatory, consequential, punitive, and nominal damages. Let's take a look at each one, because they all do a slightly different job. First up, we have compensatory damages. This is the most common and the most straightforward type. It covers the direct, out-of-pocket losses from the breach. So, for instance, let's say a freelancer named Randall has a contract to do a project for $4,000, but the client backs out. Randall hustles and finds another project, but this one only pays $3,000. Well, his compensatory damages would be that $1,000 difference. It's the money that makes him whole. And what's interesting is that the standard way to measure these damages actually changes based on what the contract was about. For selling goods or land, it's pretty simple. What was the contract price versus what's the current market price? But look at construction. It gets way more specific. If the owner breaches, the contractor gets what they expected to profit. But if the contractor breaches, the owner gets what it's going to cost to hire someone else to finish the job. Okay, next up, consequential damages. Now, these are a little different. They cover the indirect losses that happened because of the breach. But here's the absolute key. The party who broke the contract had to know, or at least have a good reason to know, about these special circumstances when they made the deal. If they didn't, they're not on the hook for them. Let me give you a classic example that makes this crystal clear. Imagine a vendor who knows their client is buying a special sports drink with the specific plan to resell it immediately to the huge crowds at the Super Bowl. If that vendor fails to deliver the drinks, they aren't just liable for the cost of the drinks themselves. Oh no, they're liable for all the lost profits from those sales to the fans because they knew all about that special plan. Now for our last two types of damages, which are kind of like polar opposites. Punitive damages are designed to punish someone. But get this, they are almost never awarded in contract law. A contract is just a civil agreement. It's not about morality. The only real exception is if there was something else going on, like fraud. Then you have nominal damages. This happens when there was a breach for sure, but nobody actually lost any money. A court might award one single dollar, just to make a point that, yes, a wrong was technically committed. Okay, so we've got a handle on our main tool, which is money. But what happens when a check just can't fix the problem? What if the thing you were supposed to get is completely unique, one of a kind? Well, for that, we have to pull out some of the specialized power tools from our legal toolkit. We call these equitable remedies. The big one here is called specific performance, and it is exactly what it sounds like, a court order that forces the breaching party to do the specific thing they promised to do in the contract. But courts are really hesitant to use this. It's only for situations where money would be a totally useless remedy, usually because the subject of the contract is unique. And this comparison right here really gets to the heart of it. Check this out. For a contract to sell a piece of land, specific performance is granted almost always. Why? Because every single piece of land on Earth is considered legally unique. You can't just go buy an identical replacement. But for personal services, almost never. A court will not force a world-famous painter to paint a portrait because that would be like involuntary servitude. And besides, how could you even guarantee the quality of work done under threat of a court order? A couple of other important tools in this category are rescission and reformation. Think of rescission as the big undo button. It just cancels the contract, and both sides have to return whatever they exchanged. Everybody goes back to square one. Reformation, on the other hand, is more like a surgical edit. If there was a typo, or a clerical error, or maybe even fraud, a court can actually go in and rewrite a part of the contract to show what the parties really meant.
All right, so now we know our tools. We've got the standard ones and the specialized ones. But before you can use any of them, there are a couple of really important rules of the game that you absolutely have to follow.
First up is the duty to mitigate. This is a huge one. The law says that the innocent party can't just sit on their hands and watch their financial losses pile up after a breach. You have a duty to take reasonable steps to limit the damage. For example, if you're wrongfully fired from your job, you can't just sit on the couch for a year and expect a full year's salary. You have to at least try to find a similar job. Now, what if the parties actually try to plan for a breach ahead of time? That's where a liquidated damages clause comes into play. You see these a lot in big construction projects, where a delay of even one day costs a ton of money. So the contract itself will name a dollar amount to be paid for a breach. But here's the catch. If that amount is a fair, good faith estimate of the actual damages, it's totally enforceable. But if it's some crazy high number just designed to punish the other side, a court will call it an unenforceable penalty. So how does a court tell the difference? Well, it applies a really simple two-question test. Number one, when the deal was first signed, did it look like it would be really hard to calculate the actual damages if a breach happened? And two, was the amount they picked a reasonable estimate and not some wild, excessive number? If the answer to both of those questions is yes, then that liquidated damages clause is almost certainly getting enforced. So let's wrap this all up. The most important thing to take away from this is that a remedy for a breach of contract is not a one-size-fits-all deal. It isn't always just about getting a check in the mail. It's about looking at the specific situation, opening up that legal toolkit, and picking the right tool, whether it's money, a specific action, or even that undo button, to truly fix a broken promise. And that really leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We've seen that sometimes even the law agrees that money isn't enough to fix the problem. So the real question for all of us is, in our own deals and agreements, when is a broken promise worth more than just the money?